The Influence of Islam. Part 30. Muslim treatment of non-Muslims worldwide. Britain is not a unique case. This sort of thing goes on anywhere that either welcomes mass migration from Muslim countries or contains long-established Muslim populations. There is a consistent pattern of sexual violence directed against non-Muslim minorities in settings where Muslims form the majority. Across Britain, as we have noted, girls from Sikh and Hindu backgrounds have also been targeted by Muslim gangs. Unlike the white British majority, these non-Muslim immigrant populations were never prevented from organizing as a collective to protect their own. In doing so, as was their duty, the network of Sikh organizations drew attention to the appalling treatment of non-Muslims in Pakistan. We need only look at the appalling treatment of girls from minority faiths in Pakistan, where Christian, Hindu and Sikh girls are kidnapped, forced to convert to Islam and married, to get an understanding of the underlying motivations. In 2018, around 1,000 girls in Pakistan's Sindh province, alone, suffered this fate. In many cases, perpetrators are granted impunity due to corruption and connivance with local officials. In April 2024, UN human rights experts expressed serious alarm regarding the vulnerability of minority girls in Pakistan to forced religious conversions and forced marriages. Their press release highlighted that Christian and Hindu girls in particular face heightened risks of abduction, trafficking, child forced marriage, domestic servitude, and sexual violence. Human rights groups and media reports, including a 2021 BBC investigation, have estimated that thousands of non-Muslim girls, primarily Christians, Hindus, and Sikhs, are abducted annually in Pakistan, compelled to convert to Islam, and forced into marriage with their abductors. One documented case involved Farah, a 12-year-old Christian girl abducted from her home in June 2020 by 3 Muslim men, sexually abused, and forced to perform household labor as a slave. A common sequence in these cases sees a girl abducted, coerced into signing a conversion certificate, and swiftly married to a Muslim man. Police in Pakistan frequently side with the abductors over the girl's family. When parents pursue legal action, courts tend to uphold the legitimacy of the conversion. Birth certificates may be falsified to indicate that the girl is not a minor. Contact with her family is typically blocked. Following conversion to Islam, non-Muslim parents lose all authority over their child, as Islamic law prohibits non-Muslims from exercising guardianship over Muslims, including their own offspring. The evidence from grooming gang convictions across Britain repeatedly shows a Muslim background among many of the perpetrators. When this is viewed alongside similar patterns of sex crimes observed both in countries of origin for immigrants and in Muslim-majority societies, it offers compelling grounds to consider that elements of Islam are contributing to the grooming gang scourge in our country. While it is unsurprising that a religion can shape and regulate sexual behavior, the suggestion that Islam might play a role in driving sex crimes remains deeply uncomfortable for some in the liberal West. Even so, the possibility of an Islamic influence on these crimes cannot be dismissed. The available data strongly points towards it, as a hypothesis that merits serious examination. The impact of any religion on individual behavior is rarely direct and unmediated. It is heavily filtered through culture, which a religion can gradually reshape over generations. Not all Muslim communities or societies are influenced by Islam to the same degree or in the same manner. Minority Muslim populations may behave differently from majority ones. For instance, convictions of Indian-origin Muslim men in grooming gang cases across Britain are notably rare compared with those of Pakistani heritage. This disparity may relate to a demographic context. Muslims form only about 14% of India's population, with Hindus comprising around 80%. Placing them in a minority position where social and legal constraints differ markedly from Pakistan, where Muslims dominate overwhelmingly and non-Muslims constitute a small, often marginalized minority. In such a setting, exploiting non-Muslim neighbors becomes far easier. At least 8 theological aspects of Islam may contribute to cultural patterns that enable or normalize the sexual abuse of non-Muslim girls. These include 1. The doctrine of Muslim superiority, 2. The principle of loyalty and disavowal, al-wala wal-bara. 3. Male dominance over women. 4. Enforced seclusion and veiling of women. 5. Forced marriage combined with the absence of a fixed minimum age of consent. 6. The perception of female sexuality as inherently dangerous or fitna. 7. The historical Sharia institution of slavery. 8. And the system of dhimitude. These are all rooted in classical Islamic theology, up to and including Islamic jurisprudence. But even in Sharia-governed nations, adaptations are common, such as setting a minimum marriage age or restricting unilateral divorce by men in order to lessen the harsher effects on women. Part 31. Muslim Supremacism. Islam holds that those who are righteous and truly fear God, meaning Muslims, are inherently superior to those who reject God's commands, namely non-Muslims. This idea is captured in the Quran. Quote, "You, Muslims, are the best nation raised up for humankind, commanding what is good and forbidding what is wrong, and believing in Allah. If only the people of the book believed, it would be better for them. Some among them are believers, but most are perverted." Surah 3, 110. The verse positions Muslims as the finest community, entrusted by God with the duty to enjoin good and prohibit evil. This responsibility can be understood as authorizing Muslims to correct, compel, or, if needed, punish non-Muslims, potentially through coercion or force. Other Quranic passages affirm Islam's ultimate supremacy over all religions, as in Surah 48, 28. Quote, "It is He, Allah, who has sent His messenger with the guidance and the religion of truth, Islam, to make it triumph over every religion." Non-Muslims who refuse Islam are described in harsh terms, such as in Surah 8, 55. Quote, "Surely the worst of animals in Allah's sight are rejectors of Islam. They do not believe." The concept of Muslim superiority is closely linked to derogatory views of non-Muslims. For instance, Surah 9:28 labels associators, a pejorative term encompassing Christians, Jews, and other non-Muslims, as unclean. Najis. These teachings can provide a religious justification that bolsters and abuses conviction of their own superiority and facilitates the dehumanization of non-Muslim victims. In her July 2020 podcast interview, Rotherham survivor Dr. Ella Hill described abusive language and acts that embodied this sense of superiority. She recounted being made to bend down and kiss her perpetrator's feet as a deliberate act to underscore her inferiority. She also spoke of another Rotherham victim who, during gang rapes by dozens of men, was forced to lick their feet clean because they believed they were morally superior to her. Hill observed, quote, "It's a Muslim superiority thing. They believe they have maximum moral authority to command the people beneath them to lick their feet." She further noted that her abusers viewed non-Muslim habits as inherently impure. Quote, "If you're eating pork, you're unclean, you're dirty. If you use a knife and fork, you're dirty if you don't eat your food with your hands." Part 32. Us and Them Mindset. The Islamic principle known as al-wala wal-bara, loyalty and disavowal, commands Muslims to direct their love and allegiance towards what pleases God while hating, avoiding, and distancing themselves from what displeases Him. In essence, it calls for loving and supporting fellow believers and rejecting non-believers. This teaching draws on several Quranic verses, including, "Let not the believers take the disbelievers as allies rather than of believers. Whoever does that has nothing from God, unless you guard yourselves as a precaution." Surah 3, 28. "You who believe, do not take the Jews and the Christians as allies. They are allies of each other. Whoever of you takes them as allies is already one of them. Surely God does not guide the people who are evil doers, i.e. non-Muslims. Yet you see those in whose hearts is a sickness, they are quick to turn to them. Whoever takes God as an ally, and His messenger, Muhammad, and those who believe, Muslims, surely the party of God, they are the victors." Surah 5, 51-52 and 56. "There was a good example for you in Abraham, and those who were with him, when they said to their people, 'Surely we are quit of you and what you serve instead of God. We repudiate you, and between us and you enmity has appeared, and hatred forever, until you believe in God alone.'" Surah 60, 4. These passages emphasize that Muslims should maintain strong bonds within the Muslim community, while keeping non-Muslims at a distance and harboring enmity toward them. The Quran warns that God views non-Muslims with contempt and that Muslims who befriend, ally with, or associate closely with them risk being regarded by God as disbelievers themselves. While some Muslims downplay this doctrine, revivalist movements, which have gained considerable influence in Western countries, have actively promoted it, presenting strict adherence to loyalty and disavowal as vital for the Muslim community's success in carrying out its divine mission. Beyond its theological role, Al-Wala Walbara has profoundly shaped certain Islamic cultures. In such environments, many Muslims feel strong pressure not to say or do anything that could damage the image of the Muslim community or bring discredit to Islam. Within an honor and shame-based framework, reinforced by these values, speaking out to outsiders about wrongdoing committed by fellow Muslims is often seen as an act of betrayal. This dynamic can have serious real-world consequences. For example, in her book, The Imam's Daughter, 2009, Hanan, later known as Hannah, described her experience as a 14 or 15-year-old Pakistani teenager in Britain. After confiding in a female teacher that her father, an imam, was beating her, the teacher informed the deputy head, who arranged for a male Pakistani Muslim social worker to meet with her at school. Initially terrified because of his background, Hanan eventually opened up to him about being treated as a domestic servant, fearing a forced marriage, and enduring physical abuse. That same afternoon, she returned home to find the social worker speaking with her father, and relaying everything she had said. While the social worker was present, her father acted kindly, but once he left, her father subjected her to a severe beating and sexual assault, threatened to kill her if she ever spoke again, and imprisoned her in the cellar for days. When Hanan later encountered the social worker at school and refused further contact, he reportedly told her, quote, "Hey, I was just doing what I thought was right, you know that. It's not right to betray your community." Similar patterns have appeared in accounts from grooming gang survivors. Some have described approaching the police only to be interviewed by Muslim officers who switched off the recording device and urged them to abandon their complaints due to supposed lack of evidence. A deeply ingrained culture of enforced loyalty and community protection can discourage individuals from reporting abuses or providing evidence against members of their own group. Had the social worker in Hanan's case reported her disclosures to the police, leading to her father facing criminal charges, he would have exposed himself, and by extension those associated with him, to the serious risk of being labeled a traitor within the community. The prominent Indian Pakistani Muslim thinker and revivalist Abul Ala Maududi, in his influential work, Let Us Be Muslims, 2016, maintained that Muslims cannot achieve true success until their highest allegiance is given to God and to the Muslim Ummah community. The doctrine of loyalty and disavowal exerts particularly strong pressure when Muslims live as a minority in non-Muslim host societies. In such settings, as they seek to preserve and assert a powerful collective identity, Muslims may place even greater emphasis on internal solidarity and separation from non-believers than they would in their countries of origin. Part 33. Superiority and dominance of men over women. Islam establishes that men hold the position of managers or maintainers over women, as stated in Surah 434, where the role involves ensuring women remain in their proper state. Under Islamic law, every woman remains under the guardianship of a male relative. Normally, this is her father. Should the father be unable to serve due to death, loss of mental capacity, or apostasy from Islam, a specified order of male relatives from the paternal line steps in, starting with the paternal grandfather, then sons, brothers, nephews, and uncles. Surah 434 further authorizes men to discipline their wives, including through physical violence. Numerous authoritative sources and Sharia regulations reinforce the notion of women's inferiority to men. Surah 2-228 declares that men hold a rank above women. The Prophet Muhammad stated that women are deficient in both religion and intelligence relative to men, and in the same hadith, he noted that women form the majority of those in hell. He also taught that if a woman or a dog passes in front of a praying man, the prayer is invalidated, a reason mosques position men with their backs to women during prayer. Sharia obliges a wife to engage in sexual intercourse with her husband whenever he desires it. If she refuses, Muhammad said the angels will curse her until morning. Divorce under Sharia strongly favors men. A husband may unilaterally divorce his wife without stating a reason simply by pronouncing, "I divorce you," 3 times. For a wife, obtaining a divorce is far more difficult, typically involving a formal legal process and often a financial cost. Following divorce, the mother may retain physical custody of young children up to a particular age, but the father retains legal guardianship. Moreover, if the mother remarries, she loses the right to have children from her previous marriage reside with her. Sharia rules on evidence further diminish women's status, valuing a woman's testimony at half that of a man's. Inheritance laws under Sharia generally allocate women half the share given to men. For example, a son receives twice the portion of a daughter. A wife or wives together inherit 1/4 of a husband's estate if he leaves no children, or 1/8 if he does leave children. In contrast, a husband inherits half of his wife's estate if she has no children, or 1/4 if she does. Sharia's approach to sexual assault also disadvantages women. Sexual assault is categorized as a form of zina, illicit sexual intercourse, the same offense that covers adultery and fornication. Zina is defined as sexual intercourse between a man and a woman who is neither his wife nor his slave. There is no distinct offense of sexual assault. It is treated as coerced zina, and marital sexual assault is not recognized. The penalty for the rapist mirrors that. For consensual extramarital sex, 100 lashes for an unmarried person, or stoning to death for one who is, or has been married. When a woman accuses a man of sexual assault, her consent is presumed unless both the act of penetration and her lack of consent are proven by 4 male eyewitnesses, who each directly observed the man's penis entering the woman's vagina. Naturally, the presence of 4 men witnessing a sexual assault without intervening makes it highly improbable they would testify in the victim's favor. Should a woman allege sexual assault but fail to produce the 4 required male witnesses, she risks being convicted of zina on the basis of her own accusation. In 2003, Pakistan's National Commission on the Status of Women reported that up to 88% of women imprisoned in Pakistan were sexual assault or gang rape victims who, unable to meet the 4-witness requirement, were instead convicted of illicit sex. Taken together, these Sharia provisions that institutionalize male dominance over women exert a profound influence. In cultures shaped by Islam, boys can be raised to grow into men who assume rightful control over the women in their lives, confident in their inherent superiority. Part 34. The seclusion of women. Islamic law contains multiple provisions that mandate the covering and seclusion of women. It is widely recognized that a Muslim woman must cover most of her body when appearing in public. Additionally, Sharia grants a male guardian the authority to restrict a girl's or a woman's movements, allowing him to confine a wife or daughter to the home and permit her to leave only when accompanied by a male relative and for a valid reason. This is reflected in Surah 33-33, which instructs women, "Stay in your houses and do not flaunt yourselves." One consequence of the Sharia-derived culture of covering and seclusion is that a woman who appears in public without covering, or remains outside the protected space of the home, may be culturally perceived as unguarded and therefore sexually available or promiscuous. This notion, that an uncovered woman invites molestation, is suggested in Surah 33-59 of the Quran, where Muhammad is instructed that his wives and daughters should cover themselves so they are not abused. Certain Islamic preachers have explicitly endorsed this view, following the high-profile convictions of Muslim men of Lebanese background for sexual assault in Sydney, Australia. The country's Grand Mufti, Sheikh Taj al-Din al-Halali, controversially placed blame on the victims for not being covered and not remaining in their homes. He stated, quote, "If you take out uncovered meat and place it outside without cover, and the cats come to eat it, whose fault is it? The cats, or the uncovered meats? The uncovered meat is the problem. If she was in her room, in her home, in her hijab, no problem would have occurred." In making these remarks, Sheikh al-Halali was presenting Islamic norms as the remedy to crimes of the kind committed by sexual assault gangs. According to this perspective, if individuals adopted Islam and adhered to its rules, women and girls would be protected from such abuses because they would be kept secluded, placed under permanent male supervision, and rendered invisible to outsiders. Part 35. Forced marriage and the age of consent. Under Sharia, marriage takes the form of a contract arranged between 2 men, the groom and the bride's male guardian, her wali. The structure closely resembles a contract of sale. The groom pays an agreed sum, known as the mahr, to the bride, and in exchange she becomes sexually available to him. Islamic jurisprudence sets no minimum age at which a girl or a woman may be married. Religious authorities permit a father to arrange a marriage for his daughter even while she is still an infant. The Prophet Muhammad himself married Aisha when she was 6, an arrangement made between Muhammad and her father, and consummated the marriage when she was 9. The Quran itself addresses the remarriage of a divorced girl who has not yet reached menstruation. Surah 65:4. Sharia distinguishes between types of guardians. The bride's father or paternal grandfather is termed a wali mujbir, forcing guardian, because certain schools of Islamic law allow him to compel a virgin daughter or granddaughter into marriage without her consent. The notion that a girl must reach a particular age before she can consent to sexual activity is foreign to Islam. In Islamic teaching, the only lawful context for a woman to consent to sex is through marriage, and even that consent is not always required. Significantly, the Arabic term nikah denotes both marriage and sexual intercourse. Sharia in effect merges the two concepts. An unmarried woman is forbidden from engaging in sex, while a married woman has no right under Sharia to refuse sexual relations with her husband. Hadiths further state that a virgin's silence constitutes consent to marriage. This merging of consent to marriage and consent to sex sheds light on Dr. Hill's account that her abusers interpreted their victim's silence as consent to the grooming, drawing on these same hadiths. Islamic scholars differ on the degree of physical or emotional maturity needed for sexual intercourse within marriage. Some hold that the onset of puberty serves as the threshold for readiness, though Muhammad consummated his marriage with the 9-year-old Aisha before she reached puberty, and others permit thigh, intercrural sex, with a wife who is menstruating or considered too young for vaginal penetration. This practice Dr. Hill also described. These observations suggest that Muslim grooming gangs may exhibit religious and cultural indifference to the modern concept of an age of consent. In an interview, Andrew Norfolk, one of the first journalists to expose Britain's grooming gang scandal, stated that although Islam prohibits sex outside marriage, all 4 schools of Islamic jurisprudence teach that a girl can be married when she reaches puberty, which on average in Britain is 11. When the Muslim Brotherhood government took power in Egypt, one of the new laws they were going to introduce was to lower the age of consent from 18 to 13, and disappointment was voiced by certain Salafis and Muslim Brotherhood scholars that it wasn't 9. The Islamic State had 9 as the permissible age for marriage. I don't think there's the same sense of wrongness and shame in some cases about having sex with a 12-year-old girl. Part 36. Female sexuality. Islamic canonical sources portray women as possessing sexual desires that are at least as strong as men's, if not stronger, and view these desires as potentially harmful to men. The Prophet Muhammad stated, "After me I have not left any trial more severe to men than women." The Arabic term fitna used here denotes a severe trial that can involve seduction or temptation leading people astray from faith, and it also carries connotations of chaos that disrupts social harmony. Muhammad further suggested that men are susceptible to sexual temptation, explaining that Allah has preordained a portion of zina, unlawful sexual intercourse, for every man. Allah has written for the son of Adam his inevitable share of zina, whether he is aware of it or not. One practical expression of anxiety over women's sexuality is the practice of female genital mutilation, FGM, which various schools of Islamic law either require or strongly recommend as a way to curb excessive female sexual desire. Another reflection of the perceived danger posed by female sexuality is the strict separation of the sexes, enforced through practices such as veiling women's bodies, restricting them to the home, and the Quranic directive against men and women gazing at one another. Quote, "Tell the believing men that they should lower their gaze and guard their private parts. That is purer for them. Surely Allah is aware of what they do. And say to the believing women that they should lower their gaze and guard their private parts, and not show their charms." Surah 24-30-31. Dr. Hill described being subjected to this rule in practice. "I was told to look at the floor when I was around Muslim men. She was informed that if a woman looks at a man, that means she wants to have sex with him." Although female sexuality is seen as a source of fitna, Sharia assigns men regarded as more rational and better able to exercise self-restraint, the God-given responsibility to oversee and regulate women. From this perspective, a woman who fails to comply with Sharia norms, for instance, by appearing unveiled and unaccompanied in public, represents a danger to social order. In such a framework, responsibility for any sexual assault she suffers is often attributed to her own behavior, especially when combined with notions of the inherent impurity of non-Muslims. This outlook leads to non-Muslim women who appear uncovered and move freely without male supervision being labeled as sluts, who are eager to entice men. In this cultural context, a Muslim man who engages in sexual activity with such a woman bears no blame. The fault lies entirely with the woman. Islamic teachings concerning the perilous nature of female sexuality and the moral inferiority of non-Muslims can reinforce and legitimize this pattern of attributing responsibility to the victim. Part 37. Jihad and Sex Slavery. Islamic Sharia contains detailed regulations governing armed conflict, including provisions related to the institution of slavery. In Islamic law, slavery arises as a consequence of warfare against non-Muslims, infidels. Non-Muslim captives taken in such conflicts are regarded as lawfully enslaved simply by virtue of their capture. These captives may then be allocated to Muslim combatants as part of the war booty, spoils. They can subsequently be sold, ransomed, or retained in slavery. Historical records show that during the Prophet Muhammad's lifetime, Muslim forces enslaved women captured from enemy groups in more than a dozen military engagements. Under Sharia, sexual relations between a male owner and his female captive slave do not constitute zina. This is explicitly authorized in multiple Quranic passages, for example Surah 4:24, Surah 23:6, Surah 70:30, and supported by numerous hadith precedents. Moreover, Muhammad taught that a married non-Muslim woman captured in war is automatically divorced from her previous husband by the act of capture itself. As a result, sexual intercourse between her Muslim captor, owner and the, formerly, married captive does not amount to adultery. At first glance, it may appear incongruous to connect the classical Islamic institution of slavery with the sexual abuse of white girls in contemporary Britain. Yet the historical record reveals a long-standing pattern of Islamic enslavement and sexual exploitation of white women. Historians estimate that between the 16th and 19th centuries, approximately 1 million Europeans were seized for profit as part of the Barbary slave trade. In March 1786, when Thomas Jefferson and John Adams inquired of Tripoli's ambassador to France why the Barbary states waged war on nations that had not attacked them, Sidi Haji Abdul Rahman reportedly answered, quote, "It was written in their Quran that all nations which had not acknowledged the Prophet were sinners, whom it was the right and duty of the faithful to plunder and enslave, and that every Muslim, who was slain in this warfare was sure to go to paradise." He said also that the man who was the first to board a vessel had one slave over and above his share. In recent times, Islamic terrorist groups such as ISIS have openly asserted the right to revive Islamic slavery. A significant contemporary legal debate among Muslim scholars concerns the proper classification of Western countries that now host large Muslim immigrant populations. In classical Islamic jurisprudence, any non-Muslim nation was presumptively categorized as Darul Harb, the house of war, from which Muslims had the right and duty to take slaves, as articulated by the Tripoli ambassador. Medieval Sharia treated Darul Harb as the default status for infidel territories. A doctrine attributed to Muhammad further obliges Muslims residing in Darul Harb to perform hijra, migration, to a territory governed by Islam, particularly if they cannot freely practice their faith. This duty to migrate continues to be emphasized by many Salafi groups. In modern times, however, various adaptations have emerged to accommodate changed realities. Some authorities now classify Western nations as Darul Dawa, house of propagation, where Muslims enjoy freedom to invite others to Islam. In such circumstances, the obligation to wage jihad is thought to have been suspended. Other scholars maintain that an implicit covenant of security exists for Muslim migrants in the West. They are permitted to live and operate freely in exchange for refraining from jihad against the host society. It is worth emphasizing that the alternative classifications of Western countries, such as Darul Dawa or a tacit covenant of security, serve only to postpone, rather than eliminate, the traditional obligation to engage in jihad. For at least some Muslims with radical inclinations, the issue is not whether jihad will eventually be required, but merely when the appropriate moment arrives. Certain Muslim men, lacking deep scholarly knowledge, often rationalize their grooming gang offenses by mentally recasting their victims in the role of legitimate slave property under an Islamic framework. In Rotherham, for instance, one perpetrator named Muhammad branded his victim with the letter M as a mark of ownership. Survivors have described being compelled to perform domestic tasks such as cooking and cleaning for their captors, while enduring repeated sexual violation, mirroring the treatment of household slaves. Journalist Andrew Norfolk captured this mindset when he observed, "Some of these Muslim kids have got an idea, probably because it's quite convenient for them, that Britain's been designated a land of war, so certain things have become permissible in terms of the enemy. I think some of these guys think it's okay to do stuff to white girls that they wouldn't dream of doing to Muslim girls." Part 38. Dhimitude, Islam's treatment of conquered non-Muslim peoples. Islamic jurisprudence also addresses the treatment of non-Muslim populations conquered through jihad. Classical Sharia rules on jihad, defined as warfare waged against non-Muslims to extend the dominion of Islam, crystallized during the medieval era. As we have just noted, these rules divided the world into two fundamental categories: the Darul Islam, the House of Islam, territories governed by Islamic authority, and the Dar al-Harb, the House of War, territories under non-Muslim control. Under this framework, non-Muslims fell into one of two groups. Those residing within the House of Islam were considered protected, provided they fulfilled specific obligations and were not legitimate targets of military action. By contrast, those living in the House of War could lawfully be fought, defeated, and upon capture enslaved. When non-Muslim communities came under Islamic rule, they were granted conditional tolerance through a formal surrender agreement known as the Dhimma Pact. This arrangement allowed dhimmis, protected non-Muslims, to retain their religion, but only on the condition that adult males paid an annual tax called the jizya, and that the entire community observed a range of restrictive regulations. As the renowned commentator Ibn Kathir explained, these rules were designed to ensure their continued humiliation, degradation, and disgrace. If a dhimmi community was deemed to have violated the pact, whether by failing to pay the jizya or by breaching any of the imposed conditions, Islamic law permitted the resumption of jihad. In such circumstances, the full Sharia regulations of war would apply. Adult males could be killed, women and children enslaved, and the property of non-Muslims seized as spoils. The Dhimma framework imposed a permanent condition of insecurity on Christian and other non-Muslim populations under Muslim sovereignty. It has supplied a religiously sanctioned cultural template that continues to underpin the abduction, forced conversion, and coerced marriage of non-Muslim girls in places such as Egypt and Pakistan. One way to view the involvement, or lack thereof, of British state officials in the grooming gang scandal is as an incorporation of dhimmi-like submissiveness. This mindset prioritizes deference to Islam and Muslims above all else, while dismissing or assigning fault to non-believers. From this perspective, the failure of authorities to act decisively against the grooming gang issue might represent a significant step in the gradual Islamization of Britain. Part 39. Islamic Clan Culture. Evidence from the author and activist Ayaan Hirsi Ali at the inquiry highlights that the grooming gangs operating in towns such as Rotherham, Rochdale, and others are not isolated instances of criminality, but stem from imported pre-modern clan systems embedded within certain ethno-cultural communities, reinforced by specifically Islamic collectivism. As before stated, the crimes disproportionately involve perpetrators from Pakistani heritage backgrounds, with patterns rooted in honor and shame-based dynamics that are wholly anathema to British norms. The behavior is deeply tied to tribal structures prevalent in parts of Pakistan, Afghanistan, the Middle East, North Africa, and Somalia. Family honor is primarily vested in the conduct, modesty, and virginity of girls and women. Strict codes require obedience, covering, and restricted interaction with outsiders. Breaches within the community trigger severe sanctions, including honor killings or collective retaliation by male clan members. When the target is a non-Muslim girl, particularly white British girls perceived as unguarded, dressed in Western styles and lacking male protectors, the risk calculation shifts. No retaliation is expected from the girl's family or community, so some young men feel emboldened to treat her as property, and then approach, assault, groom, share among the group, and sell her services. This proprietorial view of women escalates into organized networks that traffic girls across regions. Impunity fuels the cycle. Initial assaults without consequences create a perception of Britain as a place where such behavior carries no risk, turning vulnerable girls into commodified products. A key contrast emerged in evidence. When similar gangs targeted Sikh girls, the Sikh community mobilized men to confront and deter the perpetrators effectively. White working-class girls lacked equivalent collective protection, not least because authorities often silenced concerns with accusations of racism, allowing the abuse to persist and expand into modern-day slavery. Even second, third or fourth generation immigrants raised in Britain continue these patterns, acting as demographic clusters where the clan system reproduces itself and intensifies, regardless of the wider culture. Ongoing immigration from such clannish foreign backwaters serves only to replenish and strengthen such communities. While the foundational system is tribal rather than purely religious, Islamic elements provide ideological justification, communal shielding, and strategic expansion. Perpetrators sometimes hide actions from families, mosques, and imams because the behavior brings disgrace to the community. Yet, remorse toward British victims is limited, because non-Muslim girls are not viewed as fully human individuals deserving protection, but as unprotected outsiders available for abuse without moral consequence. This fosters widespread silence within affected communities. The inquiry evidence points to a fundamental clash of worlds. Across the West, our historic respect for the individual has, thanks to mass immigration, been overpowered by the more primitive attitudes that prevail elsewhere, according to which group membership matters first and foremost. The elite obsession with diversity has invited the latter to take advantage of the former. Scare words like Islamophobia and racism have been deployed to exploit the goodwill of Western host societies, paralyzing investigation and enforcement.